Hello world, Lisa Friedrichsen here, and this is the third of 3 short screencasts to debrief on the in-chapter exercise for Chapter 3 of our textbook. And in this screencast, we're going to talk about how does each table data cell get its information. The @ means we're playing an away game, and then the lightning is the opponent's name. So whether the game is home or away is stored in an array, as well as our opponent's name. So we're going to be getting that information out of the array and creating this string to put in the second paragraph of each of these table data cells. And sometimes we're not playing a game at all, and we want to put off as the text in that paragraph. So let's look at the function that creates that. It's called addGameInfo, and actually you create it using the book's instructions in 2 different ways. The first time you go through the function, you create the text using if statements. And then you comment out those if statements and use a switch statement to get the same result. So that's why I left those statements in as a comment, just to test, and I could prove that whether I use these if statements or whether I use a switch statement, I'm going to get the same result. But let's debrief on this function and see exactly what's going on. We declare a variable called paragraphs. We set it to an empty string, and then in our for clause, it has 3 parts to put inside the parentheses. The first part is how are we going to start our counter? And we're going to declare that variable right inside the parentheses. We're going to declare I as our counter, and we're going to set it equal to 0. So that's our initial value for I. The second part of the information for the for loop is how far does I go? And this says that we're going to run this loop until I is not less than 31. As soon as I is equal to 31, that will be false, and the loop will stop. And then the third part is how are we going to increment I. If we're going to increment I by 1, we put I++ there. All 3 parts must be necessary for the for loop to run correctly. And notice that they're separated by semicolons. Semicolons, as you know, are the piece of syntax that we use to indicate we're at the end of a JavaScript statement. So putting semicolons inside these parentheses seemed a little odd to me, but that's how JavaScript has defined it, so that's how we have to use it. The entire for loop is inside left and right curly braces, and the entire function, of course, is inside left and right curly braces. So at this point in time, we're going to be using a lot of curly braces, and it's just really important to match them up at the top and the bottom. Inside our for loop, we're declaring a variable called date, and we're setting it to I plus 1. So when I is 0, date is going to be 1. The reason we want date to be 1 more than I is because we're going to be referencing a table cell with that number. So declaring this variable table cell is document.getElement by ID 08- and then date, which at first it's just 1. So again, we're referencing this particular table data cell where ID equals 08-1. The first time through our loop, we're referencing that cell. We're setting paragraphs equal to table cell, which is that table data cell, get elements, plural, by tag name P. So once again, our first 2 statements are referring to this table cell and these paragraph elements. Then if I come down to my switch statement, I'm going to look at game location I. I in the beginning is 0. What's game location? It's an array. So I'm going to look at game location. At first I is set to 0. So my first game location is away. And if that's true, if away is the value of this, then I'm going to do paragraphs 1.innerHTML is set to the @ symbol. So in other words, if I'm working on an away game location, I want to set the paragraphs 1, which is the second paragraph tags here in my table data cell, because the first is 0. I want to set its inner HTML to @. If the game location is home, I'm going to set it to VS, and then notice the little space after the @ symbol and after the VS, because we're going to take that paragraphs 1.innerHTML and we're going to add it to itself plus whatever the value of opponent's I is. And opponent's I in the first pass is going to be opponent's 0, and I go up in my array here and I find that my opponent's 0 is lightning. So the first time through that loop, we're going to put @lightning in the second paragraph of that cell. The loop keeps running 30 more times from 0 to 30 until it hits number 31. And when it hits number 31, this is false and the loop stops. So we're setting ID 08-1 through 08-31. Those 31 IDs are corresponding to array values 0 through 30 in our array opponents and our array game location. I'm going to move my comments to comment out my switch statement and run my if statements, save and refresh, and just make sure that that code runs exactly the same, and it does. So these if statements and this switch statement do the exact same thing, only using different constructs. In this if statement, after the if, in the parentheses, we do one test. And this is testing if game location I, at first I is 0, is equal to away, and 3 equal signs means it has to be equal to away both in value as well as in data type. So sometimes you'll see 2 equal signs, and that just means that the value of this has to be equal to the value of that. If that's true, it will evaluate true. If it's false, it will evaluate false. 3 equal signs means you not only have to have the same value, you have to be the same data type. And that's not really a problem here because we are identifying away in quotation marks. We know that's text, and game location I, when we go up to our array, is also away in quotation marks. So not only are the values the same, they're both strings. So we don't really need the 3 equal signs here because they're both obviously strings. But sometimes when you're working with numbers, you're not sure if the value is the number 5 or the textual character 5, and 3 equal signs can come into play there. 1 equal sign means set to. I'm taking this variable and I'm setting it to this item on the right. 2 or 3 equal signs means are these equal? So we're doing a test. 2 equal signs means are the values equal, and 3 equal signs means are the values and the data types equal. And if that's true, if it's away, we're going to set the paragraph's inner HTML property to the @ symbol plus a space. If it was home, we're going to set it equal to verses in a space. In this case, I'm using 2 if statements, 2 individual if statements. In this case, the author is teaching you how to use an if statement and then an else statement. So those are 2 separate constructs, just standalone if statements, or you can also use if else, which is a little bit faster because if statements are all checked as individual standalone constructs, whereas it's a little bit swifter to use if else logic when you know that the options are mutually exclusive. I'm going to put my comments back around my if statements because I'm not going to use them. I'm going to use the switch statement. I'm going to save this. My calendar loads correctly again. Look at one more thing. That is the function to populate the calendar, which simply calls the add column headers function, add calendar dates function, and add game info function, the 3 functions we just debriefed on in the last 3 screencasts. And then finally, we run setup page using an event listener. Only prior to chapter 3, in chapter 2, our event listener simply looked like this one line, window.addEventListener, on load, run the function, and then the last argument was false. However, the book explains that older browser did not have this method, addEventListener, so we had to use the window attach event method. So what this is saying is if your browser understands this method, if this is true, run the event listener. If that evaluates false, and if you have a window.attachEvent method, if that evaluates true, then do this statement, which is the old statement to run the setup page function on older Internet Explorer browsers. Notice the onload event in the old Internet Explorer browser versus in the new JavaScript. The event name does not include the on portion of the event name in JavaScript. Thank you.